Hi guys, it's John here, and this is a benchmarking comparison test of the Galaxy S22 Ultra, Galaxy S23 Ultra, Galaxy S24 Ultra, and the S24 Plus. So we have the two S22 Ultras here. We have the Exynos 2200, Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. In the S23 Ultra, we have the 8 Gen 2, S24 Ultra, the 8 Gen 3, and the S24 Plus, the 2400. So we're going to run through our usual benchmark tests. That's going to be the GeekBench tests and the AI tests. Run through the AnTuTu, 3D Mark, and then do some browser benchmarks. Right, so the GeekBench CPU has finished, and we can see here quite clearly the S24 Ultra is still winning here, but none of the phones have had much of an improvement over last month. So we'll move straight on to the GPU test now and see how they do there. Right, so the GPU test has also finished, and we can see here the Exynos 2400 still doing really well here with a score of 15,957. That's beating the 8 Gen 3 with a score of 15,281. But overall, no massive improvements really across the board, just a small increase of nearly 4% on the 2200. Okay, so the AI test is finished now, and we can see here we have had an improvement here on the 8 Gen 3 compared to last month. It wasn't beating the 2400 for CPU, but it is now beating it just by a few points. The 2400 still wins on the GPU, however, with a score of 1760, but the 8 Gen 3 takes the NN API at 677. So let's move on to the AnTuTu Benchmark now and see how they compare to last month's scores. So nothing very exciting here with the AnTuTu Benchmark, sadly. We haven't quite reached 2 million yet on the 8 Gen 3, but we are getting close with a score of 1.84 million. 2400 not far behind with a score of 1.79 million. And the 8 Gen 2 is not far behind that either, with a score of 1.56 million. Two S22s here, very close as well. Just 1.03 and 1.7 million between the two. Right, let's move on to the stress test now and see how we get on. Let's hope our 8 Gen 3 stays how it did like it was last month in this new March update, because this is what we want to see. And we want to see this replicated here on the S24 Ultra as well, if possible. Right, so the stress test has just finished, and look at the temperature of the 2400 here. It's 5 degrees hotter than the S23 Ultra. So that is worth bearing in mind when you consider purchasing one of these phones. If you live in a hot country, the 2400 can get pretty hot. Anyway, looking at the results here, we can see straight away the S23 Ultra is still doing really, really well. Glad to see that the cores are still performing very high, and the performance is also around 80% on average. Look at the two S22s, and they are very similar to last month. The 2200 doing mediocre at best, hovering around the 70% mark. 8 Gen 1 doing pretty well, doing around 75 to 80% for most of the test, with those cores jumping all over the place, as we always see. S24 Ultra is still very, very disappointing here. Look at this, this is down to 2 GHz after a very short period of time, just over 3 minutes into the test, and we've gone down to 2 GHz for the cores. And with that, we haven't really seen an improvement in the performance. We're down here at about 55% to 60% on average, so very poor result there for the S24 Ultra. Similar story on the S24 Plus here. We can see after about 6 minutes we are down to about 2 GHz. Before that, they're not doing too badly here, the cores hovering at around 2.5 gig. But yeah, this isn't what we want to see from these brand new flagship phones really. Performance wise, hovering about 65% for the part of the test where the cores clocked down, and here at the start at around 80%. So I'd say the S24 Plus is doing better than the S24 Ultra, but compared to the S23 Ultra, that is hands down the winner yet again. Right, so battery wise, we're down to 67, 70, 76, 77 and 71%. So again, S23 Ultra doing very well here. It's only 1% behind the S24 Ultra, and this is a year older than my S24 Ultra here. 71% here for the slightly smaller S24 Plus, because it has gotten a bit warmer during the test. So you can see here it's still 43 degrees, so it's quite toasty still. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Wildlife Extreme stress test now, and a suggestion from a comment last month was to run this test 3 times in a row to see how these actually perform. That's quite extreme, but we want to give it a try and see what happens after 3 runs of this extreme stress test. Will the S24 Plus set on fire, and will the S23 Ultra be able to keep up? Let's see how it goes after 3 of these tests. Right, so then after 3 Wildlife Extreme tests, we can see some interesting results here. So obviously the stability went up as the scores went down, we're up to about 86% here on the S24 Ultra. But more interesting than that is the best loop score on the two S24s. The S24 Ultra lost well over 1,000 points here from its best loop at the start of the test to the third and final one. And the Exynos 2400 lost about 1,000. But yeah, quite a big loss there for the S24 Ultra. Whereas the S23 Ultra only lost about 400 points from the start to the end. So yeah, very interesting results there with that triple test of the Wildlife Extreme. Right, move on to Slingshot Extreme now and see how they do here. Right, so the Slingshot Extreme is finished and some interesting results again. We've got an improvement on all phones. That could be because I've actually let them cool down over lunch after the Wildlife Extreme test, so they're all starting at a cooler temperature. But either way, it's nice to see some improvements. And we can see here there's a bit of chop and change between which is better out of the S24 Ultra and S24 Plus, with the S24 Plus winning a couple of the scores here. You can see here 85.3 and 78.2, with the S24 Ultra winning the remainder. If we look at the S23 Ultra though, we can see here this is easily keeping up with both the S24 Ultra and S24 Plus still. And you have the poor 2200 here getting some quite low scores, with the 8 Gen 1 getting not too bad a score, but obviously nothing compared to the S23 Ultra. Right, we're going to move on to JetStream2 now, and we'll see how they compare here with the speed browser test. Right, so I'm not sure why the 8 Gen 1 here took so long and got such an abysmal score, but it did. So look at that, that's gone down substantial amounts from last month. Whereas the rest have all had really nice improvements since the previous month's update, especially the S24 Ultra here, which is now finally beating the S23 Ultra in terms of browser speed. Look at that, 231 versus 210. S23 Ultra though is still beating the S24 Plus here with just 3 points extra. If we look at the battery life now, we're down to 29, 27, 34, 42 and 29. Right, so we will just conclude with the solar-based stress test here. Don't forget this cannot run on the 8 Gen 1, but we'll see how we do and we'll compare it again to last month's scores. Right, so the solar beta test has just finished and we can see some nice improvements here overall with the S22 Ultra with its 2200. The S23 Ultra stayed about the same as last month, but the S24 Ultra has had a nice increase, certainly where it comes to its best loop score. So it's now beating the S24 Plus, so it's sort of reversed last month's winnings, but the S24 Plus does still win with its lowest loop score of 5747, which is quite a lot higher than the S24 Ultra. Right, so that is the end of the test, and as you can see, there's been a massive improvement here this month for the S24 Ultra, and it has won the majority of the tests, so it is this month's winner. S23 Ultra is still doing really well, however, even if it doesn't quite beat the scores of the S24 Ultra. The S23 Ultra is still performing extremely well, especially when it comes to those stress tests. So let me know what your thoughts are down below. I hope this video was useful. If it was, please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next video.